Might be anyway.
Okay, here we go. Okay, here we go. Okay. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Hop-Ons podcast, a community review podcast sponsored by our Patreon supporters. But, as usual,
Yeah.
not sponsored by John Sobriety. My name is Colin Cox.
This is an extra one. This episode's sponsored by Wild Turkey 101. Colin, good evening. How are you?
John, I have an offer for you.
You have great hair. Go on.
Thanks, buddy. Okay, so where we are geographically speaking, a lot of snow, which is not inherently a problem, but it has created some delays. So my children have been home this week. They have not attended school. They attended very little school last week. They were on winter break for close to a month prior to that. So I want to murder everyone who resides in my domicile. So John, here's my offer to you. Would you like to take 2 children tomorrow? Let me finish. One of them is a quasi-feral 3-year-old who will shout, ho, 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 I'm big and chunky, while throwing things at your face. The other one, while older, will, and this is true, accuse you on multiple occasions of being, quote, as bad as the guy who murdered MLK Jr. because you won't let him play on his Switch all day.
Jesus,
now, you might think,
Christ.
You might think, why would I take this? In exchange,
Yeah.
I will allow you one hearty kick to my junk.
No, I don't want to do that. I also don't want to watch your children. I have 2 dogs that are essentially the 2 things you've said.
Not even close. Not even, don't, no,
Okay.
not even close. This is...
I would like to discuss with you the things that have happened to me in the year of 2024. Our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, the year of our Lord.
It's basically been one giant kick to your junk.
Correct.
Right?
I have been kicked in the fucking nuts every week continually. I had a stomach bug where I shit water, Colin, and then I got COVID, which is a disease that exists. I still have. I tested negative like 2 days ago. Now my wife has COVID, and then yesterday I got a stomach bug, Colin. So I just shit and puked all day yesterday. So tonight I'm fucking hammered. I'm gonna go ahead and agree with that. Listen, this might not be the best episode of the podcast. I get it. All right, you don't have to comment on this one. I'm allowed one sort of shitty one over the course of 7 years. So let's just let her rip. I think you get the one pass. I get one. I've had a fucking dookie year. Let's just let it rip. Let me do this. Yeah. Let's talk about this episode, which, in all honesty, I'm glad I'm drunk because this fucking thing's a fever dream of an episode. I can't wait to discuss what's happened in this because I thought I'm fucking gone or this is the wildest shit that's ever been put to screen.
Do we watch the same episode, John? We are here to discuss Season 6, Episode 4 of Community, Queer Studies and Advanced Waxing. Yeah?
Yeah, we did watch the episode where they made the Jolene song by Dolly Parton, Gay Dean. And then, sort of for no reason, they had Chang being a live adaptation of The Karate Kid.
He's very good.
No, he's quite spectacular. I did tear up a couple times watching this man. But I will say, that is a fucking wild premise for a television show.
Job said it's a career maker.
Okay.
Yeah. John, it's fair. I have thoughts about anyone who likes this podcast. If you were anticipating this episode, you probably thought Colin may have thoughts about the pairing of these narratives. But John, originally aired on March the 31st, 2015, directed by Nate Faxon and Jim Rash. I think they directed maybe episode 2, if I remember correctly.
Oh, fascinating.
Maybe.
Okay. All right.
Maybe,
great.
Yeah.
Great.
Written by Matt Lawton. He has a lot of the similar sorts of writing credits that we've seen from a lot of community writers, but it looks as if the lion's share of his credits are for shows like the Jamie Kennedy Experiment, Blue Collar TV, and Mad TV.
Oh, man. As Meatloaf said, 2 out of 3. Ain't bad. Although 2 of those are pretty fucking spectacularly
Still not
awful.
great.
The
No,
Blue
this
Collar
makes-
Show. That's with Larry the Cable Guy, Colin.
That's what I thought. Yeah, I've never watched it, but
Don't lie. Don't. Everybody, he's lying. We almost did that as our second show after Arrested Development. We almost chose the Blue Collar Comedy Show.
I'm a big BCT head, so a lot of people don't know that about me.
Wow. Well, this is phenomenal compared to the other things you mentioned that he has written. Holy fuck, this is way better than
Yeah,
that.
yeah, but it makes and can I assume that Blue Collar TV is just a sketch comedy variety show? Is that right?
Lord, I apologize. That's something that Larry the Cable Guy says. I guess so. Fuck, I don't
Yeah.
know. I've never watched the show either, Colin.
Well, I am familiar with Mad TV, and I think maybe a bit of the Jamie Kennedy Experiment. It clarifies this episode's structure a bit, because this really does feel like a series of short narratives that one might find on a variety TV show, because it really doesn't feel like any of them are primary narratives, especially if you think about what the episode purports to be the A narrative. It ends like, what, 7 minutes before the episode ends? It's very, very strange.
Yeah, I think that's my biggest beef with this episode. The pacing is all over the fucking place.
Yeah.
And it's a particularly sad episode of television that you don't expect when you sit down and watch a sitcom. You don't expect it to be a very sad one, but the Dean's story is quite sad towards the end. Yeah, that's interesting. That's a good way to put it. I think if I had known that this gentleman had written a blue collar comedy show, I would have had a great bit lined up. But alas, I was not able to do that in my drunken state. This is an episode of TV that I think is great. I think it's very long in the tooth. At one point, I thought, "What is this? Return of the King?" Directed by Peter Jackson. This thing's long as fuck. But yeah, I enjoyed it. But I think
It
it
is
is
30 minutes long.
remarkably long. Yes, it's very long.
To be fair, this is the longest episode, I think, of the show, right? Assuming you're not including like 2-part episodes or something. I think this
Sure.
is maybe the longest episode. So yeah, no, that's fair, John. Quickly though, this is your IMDb plot summary. Dean Pelton is asked to lie. Chang auditions for a stage adaptation of The Karate Kid. So, John, these are 2 independent clauses combined with a semicolon. This is weird. Who did this?
Not Halo 1K. Also, the Dean one is not. That's not remarkable at all. The Dean story is quite interesting, and a lot. We have a lot to think about it. I think.
Yeah.
I do want to applaud the mise en scene for the Dean's office and all the Dalmatian stuff that I noticed the second time around. He has like 4 Dalmatian posters. He's got the Dalmatian pillows. This guy loves this fucking dog a lot.
Yeah, this is, if you remember from season 1, the end of season dance when those 2 Dalmatians come and he's dancing with, I guess what appear to be furries, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm
Yeah,
not gonna.
yeah.
I don't want to knock the furry crowd in case we have furry listeners, but it's not
Oh.
my bag, and I don't think I would ever
Let's
be
be
one
clear.
of them.
We are not here to discriminate. If you want to fuck a Dalmatian,
Okay, I would discriminate against that. I would say let's don't. I would not. Even drunk me knows that's something I would not endorse on the Hop-Ons podcast. Stamp it. Put that on a shirt. No, thank you, Colin.
so John, questionable choices about pacing notwithstanding,
Yeah.
you seem to suggest that you like this episode a bit.
Oh, I do. I mean, storytelling wise, it's a good episode. There's a lot happening in it. I don't know if I think it's a very funny episode. I think Jason Mantzoukas is a phenomenally funny actor. I think that's how you pronounce his name. The dude who plays
Mantzoukas, yeah.
Mantzoukas, who plays the director of the play. He's quite funny. But I think overall, it's not. I don't think it's a super funny episode. But I think it's an interesting episode. There's a lot with sort of morality choices and defining sort of who you are as a person. And I think it's interesting with the Dean. Like he comes to grasp to terms with this idea that he is gay, sure, but also like a million other things. But really, he comes out I love his coming out speeches. I'm coming out to say that I, sadly, am a politician. I am, mea culpa here. I am just a sort of a garbage man when it comes, when all is said and done. And
Yeah, yeah.
Chang, I think, is learning who he is by way of this director who is just so demeaning. Got a very, very Kubrick-esque, this director
Oh, really? Okay.
of the Karate Kid. I was thinking of when Kubrick made Scatman Crothers do like 127 takes on The Shining, so much so that Nicholson was
Yeah.
like, "Give the guy a break." So, yeah, it's interesting because I think Chang finds himself or finds maybe a talent through pure discipline, but like in the worst ways, and
Yeah.
and the Dean finds himself through privilege almost. It's fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it is. And this is an episode. I think this is maybe something we could say about how these seemingly disparate narratives connect. They all gravitate around this question of, as you said, identity, privilege, assumptions people make about your identity, the sorts of concessions you need to make at times to, as I think the Dean perhaps says, to be part of what you are instead of fully embodying what you are and embracing what you are, and how even though that might feel like a concession to you, it can still perhaps function and operate in extremely valuable ways to other people who may, in a broad sense, fall under, well, for example, in this episode, individuals who might fall within this LGBTQ plus umbrella, right?
Sure.
Maybe they're not, because I mean, wouldn't you say, even though they don't use this language, they're perhaps suggesting that the Dean is basically pansexual? I think that's maybe the best way to think about it.
For sure.
And
For sure.
and yeah, I don't think he encounters anyone who clarifies that they are also pansexual, but I think the implication is he, at the very least, meets and seems to receive positive affirmation from people who would probably identify themselves as gay. And so I think, again, there is this interesting conversation the episode wants to have about identities, the sorts of concessions one might make. What are, as you said, the moral and ethical responsibilities one has? Is it better to moderate or to modulate what you are, if it means by doing so you have perhaps made meaningful progress for a minority group? Is it a kind of tokenism? Is it even possible to be some kind of a pure non-political figure when thinking about questions of identity? Is it always about negotiation? I think, for example, about a figure like Barack Obama and how he, for obvious understandable reasons, was touted and celebrated for being the first black president. But John, he was far from a liberal guy. I mean, maybe he was farther to the left when he was first elected in 2008, but I'm sorry, assess his presidency. What about it was progressive? Very little by my estimation, but he did create potentially a path forward for non-white people to envision they could perhaps become the president of the United States at some point. So I think this is an episode that wants to have that kind of conversation, but I do think, as you said, there is something potentially muddled about the delivery and the execution, principally because this is just a really big episode. The primary narrative, as I mentioned earlier, ends about 7 minutes before the episode ends. I really like the Chang narrative as well. I think it's really quite beautiful. There's some fun misdirection that happens in that narrative. But I would agree with you, it's not as funny, maybe, as other episodes, because there's a real sadness to this episode, it seems. And that permeates all of the narratives.
Yeah, like I said earlier, it's a quite remarkably serious episode towards the end. They and it's interesting to like think about the Karate Kid as a film, because when I was younger, I was obsessed with that movie. I can remember when the Nintendo game came out, it was like my world changed. I got to play the Karate Kid on Nintendo. Terrible fucking game, but I loved it as a child. But the movie is like when you really think about the film being, Pat Morita's movie, and his story as Miyagi is like exceptionally sad. It's just a sad story overall. And then Chang, a character who we know from the outset has been like is a divorcee, is been fired from his job, is completely mentally unstable, and is probably only good at acting because he has like been disciplined to like almost like in a prison sort of way. That's the only reason he's good at this. That makes it even sadder, you know. And then on top of that, we see the Dean story, which ends in like the most remarkably sad way. Not because the Dean like has to sacrifice maybe making these like teenagers and college students who are LGBTQ, like who are different, quote unquote, than like society would see like standard norms. He was like representing. It reminded me of like the Leslie Knope episode with the gay penguins. When she married the penguins. Yeah. But here, like that even ends with not necessarily like the Dean's downfall as much as how much he's hurt Abed. And that moment in the study room when Abed does not invite him to the Karate Kid show, that's a blow, man. That's a big that like really hurts, I think. And I think that's what hurts the Dean more than anything, is that ultimately like he did come clean with everything, but because he stooped to like that corporate level for a second, he he killed something that was innocent. I know it's like sad. It's a lot. It's a heavy episode.
Yeah, no, and again, I think the episode almost wants to have this kind of utilitarian conversation, which is to say, how do we maximize happiness? How do we make decisions that may maximize happiness? And it is fascinating how, for the Dean, whatever happiness that he thinks people may feel or have from his presence on the school board, that fails or that is inconsequential in comparison to the lack of happiness that perhaps Abed, Elroy, and by extension the study group feels, maybe not because a bird dies, but because of, as you said, the implications, right? So what led you to make this decision? It was, by, I think, the Dean's estimation at the time, this just craven political decision. And I think, again, and what's fascinating about it to me, John, as well, is how, and I think we see this is a common critique, but I think it is a meaningful one about, at the very least, contemporary American politics, the way people make decisions that only benefit them today. There's no sense that, like, well, what if you made a decision that, while possibly painful today, could create far better results in the future? I mean, I think this is, for those who are not American listeners, a recent former Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy, one of the things that people have reported after he was removed by his own party for, to be quite frank with you, doing absolutely nothing wrong insofar as the things he did were broadly in agreement with his party's politics. People have said he just wanted to basically survive Tuesday, right? And then we'll survive Wednesday, and then we'll survive Thursday.
For sure.
And that feels like what we see from the Dean for most of this episode. It's just, how can I survive today? And I don't see how you can create anything sustainable when that's how you approach, well, doing anything, frankly.
Jesus fucking Christ. 21 minutes in, and it's already the most sad thing. Colin.
Is it sad because it's woke? Have we gotten too
No.
woke too quick?
Of course not. It's sad because this is the first time. I mean, this is like the really first time in the history of the show that like someone has just come to the Dean and said, "You're gay, right?" And the Dean has acknowledged that, but also gone so far as you would say, he's like, that's 2/7 of what I am. Meaning that the Dean will fall for anyone that the Dean wants to fall for, which is fantastic. That's a pretty groovy way to live life. But I think it's just sad that in the same episode, the dean is able to like, openly state this, and then by the end of it, like, not, I think losing the respect of like of the people at school is one thing, but losing the respect of his friends, that's the big one, And I think
Yeah.
that's a
Yeah.
hard thing to deal with. I think after, and I think it resonates with me because after my divorce in 2016, that was a big thing. It was like I can deal with like the societal views on this type of thing, but like close friends that don't want to talk to me anymore, that's a big fucking thing, to know that I've created the situation where this has happened. And I think, the dean is like, I see myself in that, and that makes it even sadder for me, I think.
Yeah, and I think it's also interesting. That's really nice, John, how receiving affirmation and adulation from relative strangers, while that feels nice, it is meaningless relative to whatever the approval of that study group provides. I think
For
that's
sure.
another
For
way
sure.
that this episode is offering this interesting contrast, and maybe even offering a subtle critique of political figures, that they seem to have a lot of anonymous people who like them, but very few, if any, close friends who like and approve of them. And I think maybe most importantly, will correct them when they make a mistake. And I think that's part of what's the sense of accountability within this group as well. I think is something that I really like, and I think it speaks to, again, this dichotomy and perhaps even juxtaposition between the adulation of nameless, not necessarily faceless, but anonymous individuals, and how he was prepared to sacrifice maybe meaningful forms of acceptance and approval for that. Even if the political calculation was the right one, this really seems to be an episode that champions those kinds of hard but intimate friendships. And I like that too.
Yeah. Yeah. So is there like, I mean, we've talked a lot already about it. Is there anything like in particular you'd like to really, get into?
Well, let's take each narrative in turn, because we have spoken a lot about the Dean's narrative. John, one of the things that I think you and I, despite what some people might think, back in 2016, I think in the pilot episode of Arrested Development, you and I asked this question: is the treatment of Tobias's sexuality fair? Is it a
Oh,
joke?
yeah.
What's the joke? Is the joke that he's queer but he doesn't know it, or is the joke it's just funny to watch non-heteronormative people fumble like this? It's a consistent critique we made of
Yeah.
Arrested Development and their use of a figure like Tobias and his sexuality to create humor. I think we've offered a similar critique of this show and its treatment of the Dean and his sexuality as a tool for comedy. This is an episode that actually uses his sexuality as a plot point, but I don't know. Tell me what you think. I'm prepared to say this is one of those episodes that seems to want to comment on and correct some of the mistakes from previous seasons, because it really does take seriously his sexuality, and there's humor to be found, but
Yeah.
it doesn't seem to be at the expense of his sexuality.
Yeah, I think that's the key. I think Tobias is a character that we loved a lot in the first, especially the first 3 seasons of the show. But I think by season 4, like Tobias becomes almost this like abusive type of character.
Oh, with Debris, right? Yeah.
To Debris, one that we like were it left a very bad taste in our mouth, and I think the jokes that were at Tobias's expense were always at the expense of his sexuality. And here it definitely is more of a commentary on the corporate world is trying to be more liberal, and we need a liberal character. And so here we're going to use, and maybe it is like a reflection of how the show feels. I don't know. That's interesting that you say that. But yeah, I don't think so. I don't think it's anything like that to Tobias feel or the Dean's. Early on, I think we felt the Dean was more they would just say, "Oh, isn't it funny that the dean's gay?" That's not funny. I mean, that's not
Yeah.
fucking funny, you know.
Yeah.
But here it's like that's not the joke. The joke is look at these two fucking asshole board directors who are trying to make the board seem more appealing to people. I think that's really that's the point. And you know, when at the broader scope of things, this is right before I guess you know we get the new Orange Dragon president, so we're trying to like deal with. People, you know, things are more open and welcoming, so maybe this is like a commentary on that. But yeah, I don't think so at all. I don't get the Tobias vibe from this at all. I'm sure you don't either.
No, I think that's my point. Is you're right. The joke is more. This is what people think inclusion is, right? It's
Right,
just
exactly,
like,
yeah.
Find me a gay, but you know,
We need a gay, quick.
one of the cool gays, like not one of the weird gays. Like that's kind of the like, and I think the humor is like watching, and I think I mentioned this at the end of season 5, and I was wrong. The board members are back. I think this is their last episode, but watching them dance around, basically not saying what I just said, which is we need a gay, not a weird gay, not a flamboyant gay. I mean, you can be kind of flamboyant, but not in a gay way. Just, you know,
Yeah.
a good, hearty gay.
Yeah, not an uncomfortable
Give me a
gay.
good, hearty-
We don't want
not
a
an
gay that makes
uncomfortable
people
gay.
like turn away. We just want like an easygoing, easy to swallow, easy to digest gay. We don't want like a fucking. We don't want a super gay. We just need a regular.
We
gay
want a gay that just slides down the
that
esophagus.
slides right down the throat. That's
really
the kind of
easy.
gay we want.
Really easy. Yeah, and like I think you see that with the partner they selected for him, Domingo, right? Like Domingo is again one of these non-offensive gays, and I think that's the joke, man. Like that's the joke. Like,
No, you're right,
Can
yeah.
we find a token gay? And it reminds me, I put this in our show notes. A late 19th, early 20th century black intellectual named W.E.B. Du Bois. Now, he was writing about race and not sexuality. He developed this concept called the talented tenth. And his point was basically, and this was during segregation, this was post-American Civil War, but it was very much during the Jim Crow period. So we're talking about the United States as ostensibly an apartheid state. His point was, as a way of demonstrating our value, we really need to find ways to elevate those incredibly talented members of our race and really do the work of using them as rhetorical figures. And because of that, the implication is they need to be these relatively non-offensive figures. And this is something you see also, for example, with a figure like Rosa Parks. She was not the first person to do what she did. She was just the first person who maybe didn't have the kinds of complications. I say that in scare quotes because it's not true, but she was a relatively uncomplicated figure to elevate as a symbol for the civil rights movement in the 1960s. That feels like what they're trying to do with the dean here, but not regarding race, but regarding sexuality. Can we make him one of these unoffensive, unobtrusive minority figures? And by doing so, again,
Yeah.
This is not about advocacy or equality. This just makes us look like tolerant people, which is really the point.
You know, it reminds me of, and I will say, this
Yeah.
is perfect when you were talking about it. There's early on in Trump's campaign, there was a moment when he's at a big rally,
Yeah.
and there's one black guy. Do you remember this? And Trump
blacks
gets
for
on
Trump?
the mic. Trump gets on the mic and he goes, "Look at my African American over there."
Yeah.
Do you remember that? That's a real thing he says. Look at my
Well, didn't he-
African American.
Didn't he have a... I mean, he basically had a kind of token figure early in his administration. I think Omarosa, was that her name?
Yes,
Yeah.
he absolutely did.
She was a
And
woman,
so,
too. Yeah,
This
so like,
is
how
like,
can you be racist? She's a black woman.
Such a
so,
Trumpy
yeah.
move, dude. This
It's
is
such
an
a Trumpy
absolute
move. Yeah.
Trumpy move.
Yeah. It's so
Ugh,
Trumpy. Yeah.
boy,
yeah.
oh
No,
boy.
I totally agree. This is, I cannot be homophobic. Look at my gay friend. That's precisely what we're seeing here. And as you said a moment ago, I think for the dean, the source of humor is not, it doesn't gravitate or circulate around him as a queer figure, but it really gravitates around the anxiety that everyone else feels. But what I also think is interesting, John, is how that anxiety doesn't remain localized to the board members. It really permeates out. So it's one of these situations where it feels like, just to be simple about it, how can figures like the dean win, right? If he is who he is, the implication, and if he's vocal and if he's transparent about who he is, the implication is, well, that's just too weird for the normies.
Sure.
But if he's constantly and perpetually moderating what he is, any small mistake or deviation becomes then a potential scandal. While the board members are openly drunk at work, not a problem. While, again, if we're just thinking about political figures, how many straight male politicians have had affairs and no problem whatsoever? In particular, incredibly conservative Republicans who touted family values. No problem. So again, I think we're also seeing, and this is part of what I think Du Bois, maybe one of the critiques of Du Bois's talented 10th was, well, are we not putting certain people in these incredibly challenging boxes where they really cannot deviate at all? They cannot make mistakes, and that's a lot of fucking pressure, you know? And we see the consequences of that. Again, the board members, their anxiety permeates out. It then becomes the dean's anxiety at that point.
Yeah, well, it's fucking heavy, man. We should, like, really quickly, before we talk about Chang, talk about Abed's little arc that he has, where...
Yeah, it's connected.
So, first off, I would like to say, number one, IT people, we do things, okay? Sometimes, maybe some days we don't have much to do, but if we're not doing things, then that means things are working pretty good. So why don't you shut the fuck up, everybody out there who's all, IT people don't do... If it's working, we did it right. Anyway.
Hey,
Elroy becomes head of IT for Greendale.
I love the IT people at my community college.
You should. I was one of them. That's a very good thing to say.
Yeah, no, but I think you know this is true. Like, the IT people are amazing. Like, they always answered my dumb questions. For some reason, I always forgot my password. They could always find it for me. I can't imagine how frustrated I made some of my IT people, and will definitely make them in the future. So,
I should state that when I worked where Colin works, I did literally nothing. I did absolutely nothing. I had worked there for 2 weeks when COVID hit. I did nothing. I sat in a room and watched cooking shows on Twitch every day and got paid for it. It was phenomenal. Anyway, Elroy and Abed become the IT people, and they are supposed to fix the Wi-Fi. Here's a few things. Number one, the Wi-Fi wouldn't be down because there's a bird's nest on the wires. That's not how anything works. It doesn't matter.
Okay.
But there's a bird's nest on the wires, and they don't want to fuck with the wires. Understandable. Abed sees this sort of like a symbol of his innocence, of his mom leaving him to fend for himself and taking his brother with her. And so he refuses to work on the bird's nest. And Elroy sort of like, I don't know if it's out of like compassion for Abed, but Elroy also agrees to not work on the wires because of the bird's nest. And now we have this sort of like this battle between the dean and Abed, but early on the dean's like, before the dean is quote unquote corrupted by this corporate mentality, the dean totally gets it. He understands it. And I just, like, I'm sure you have ideas regarding the metaphor of Abed and the bird's nest, and I would love to know those.
I think this is an interesting episode because Annie says something at the end about how, what is the point here? And I think Abed, I think that's an interesting thing for her to say, because I think this episode is so transparent about the points it's trying to make, almost to the point that, just quickly returning to the dean's narrative, when he holds his second press conference, he basically has this like Sorkin-esque monologue where he says the thesis statement to you. So I think this is an episode that almost wants to answer that question for you. I think it is this potential exploration of, at least for Abed when thinking about his investment, his innocence. But as I mentioned a moment ago, I think the way you're framing it as a kind of corruption, I think, is incredibly interesting and really smart, because again, I think this is one of those moments where you see the calculation, because notice the shift the dean makes. He makes a shift from, well, let us wait a couple of days because the consequences would be disastrous, to we need to make a decision now so that I can salvage my political fortune today. He's not even thinking about the idea that, I don't know, maybe tomorrow people will frame him as the bird murderer. That doesn't matter. That's a tomorrow problem. And again, this feels like a consistent pathology with so many political figures. Well, I mean, we could all be dead tomorrow, so why should I care about tomorrow? I'll just do what I need to do to survive today. And again, that's what it really feels like, because even the board members, John, again, returning to this, they don't seem to really think this through, and I think they speak to that later in the episode. They made a decision that angered and agitated the LGBTQ community, so they made this potentially rash decision to ask the dean to become a member of the school board. And then what, conservatives are angry because they appointed an openly gay man. So again, it's just one catastrophe and one conflict after another, because no one's interested in thinking about tomorrow. And I think that's what we also see in this narrative, the consequences of not thinking about tomorrow and the consequences of only thinking about and making decisions predicated on the particular problems you have on, in, or within a particular day.
Sounds like a bunch of boomers are running Greendale.
Really? We didn't really talk about the pairing of Abed and Elroy. Do you have any thoughts about those two together?
Oh, it's lovely. I like Elroy and Abed. Elroy's a nice little voice for Abed to have and bounce things off of. Elroy reminds me of if Van Kieser were a little bit more grounded. That's like the vibe I get from Elroy. He just wants to talk to hear himself talk, and he's super fascinating. So you just want him to keep talking. So
that's like a reference that four people might understand who's listening to this podcast.
If you've been a fan of the show for a long time, then you
know who this person
that
is.
reference.
Yeah.
If not, go back and listen from the beginning, and you'll get there eventually. So
he's the kind of person who at a Barnes and Noble would just buy a collection of some of Robert Frost's poems, and then while preparing for bed, read a couple, and then think, we'll do that one.
And then just have a good laugh.
and then just have us do it. Yeah. And call it
good
Frost.
Belly laugh.
Yeah.
Anyway. Let's talk about Chang.
Well, can I ask you just quickly about Domingo?
Yeah,
because I love Domingo so much. He's maybe my favorite part of the episode. He's so goddamn funny.
He's very funny. He's great.
He's just there the whole time.
I love when he just pops up. He just pops up for no reason. He's great. My favorite moment is when he's just in the background playing solitaire in the dean's office, because he's been hired to play a part, and he's going to do it very well and always be present. It's great. It's great.
Oh, well, he has really, in that way, incredibly strong Buster vibes, right? I bet.
Oh,
hey,
wow, yeah.
Was Domingo a Milford man? I bet he was.
He seems like he was a Milford man. He's able to pop up without anyone recognizing he's there.
It's
fantastic. That's the quintessential trademark of a Milford man. So absolutely.
If only they would allow a non-white person into the Milford Academy, which they wouldn't.
Now there you go. That's it.
Yeah,
that's the big one.
So
all right, Chang and Annie. My favorite part in this episode is the twist, the Annie twist. That's my favorite part. It's
Go
very
ahead.
good. It's done very well. So the episode starts with Chang wanting to audition for the role of Daniel, played by Ralph Macchio, in The Karate Kid, the live action stage adaptation. And so Chang is auditioning. He's very nervous, and Annie goes to the auditions with him, and Annie gets cast as Daniel, and Chang gets cast as Mr. Miyagi. And we find out later in the episode, this director of the play is just absolutely tormenting Chang. He is making him. He's throwing his coffee on him. He's shooting him with a water gun at one point. He's just yelling at him. He's like drop kicking his props. And Annie's like, if you don't stop tormenting Chang, I'm going to walk off the show. And the director's like, fine. And she's like, really? I'm going to leave. Your star's going to leave. And that's when we realize that the whole time the director has thought that Chang was the actual star and that Annie is just replaceable. She was only there because the costume would fit her from last year. Which further is funny to me because it means that this is sort of a yearly thing. Every year they just do a live action version of The Karate Kid.
Yeah. No, this is great because, and again, I think the filmmaking in this particular narrative is probably the best of the three. When Chang auditions, and casting Mantzoukas is perfect because he's of course great at being angry. He's incredibly good at being creepy and predatory as well.
Yeah, he is.
And that's like some of the Ralphie of it all, right?
It's funny because like when I see him do that, I just think about him in the league, and in the league he's just like absolutely fucking hilarious and insane. He's just
crazy,
the craziest person that's ever existed. And so when I see him in this, I don't recognize this person. He's very good.
Yeah. No, he sidebar, my favorite Ralphie line is I think he's in their league for a minute and he arrives at the bar and he says something about he needs to go take a shit, and then he says, "Then I'll come back and hang out with you, bros."
He said,
He's just shouting.
he says, "I gotta go poop the booze," because he has to drive, and he thinks that's how you get rid of alcohol. I gotta go poop the booze out. He's very funny. The League is a phenomenally good show, by the way.
Yeah,
I love that show.
It's a little tough at times, but it's really funny. He punches through a painting because what, someone came on Dick Mountain or something.
Yes.
It's very
It's
funny.
great.
He has like white cocaine all over his face. It's quite insane. But John, during the audition, we see him looking at Annie. And again, this is part of how this episode, and I think a lot of excellent media like Community does this, they have these larger, like potentially meta-referential conversations, because if you know Jason Mantzoukas, you probably know him from the League, and so you're thinking, oh my god, he's behaving in an incredibly predatory way toward Annie, but it's only retroactively that we understand why. And again, it's not because he wants to sleep with Annie, it's because he was basically assessing her proportions because he didn't want to cast someone who couldn't wear the same costume. Furthermore, by casting Chang, the implication obviously early is he just casts him for his race. But I think it's incredibly interesting how this character who just met Chang saw something in him that maybe no one else has really ever seen in Chang. Because I think what everyone else sees is madness. But what he saw, which I think is far more accurate, is sadness. There's a sadness that defines this character. And almost to the point that the episode wants us to think, how could we have missed that it's not madness, but it's really sadness that defines and drives this character. It's a kind of loneliness, a kind of isolation, a yearning, a wanting for something. And it's remarkable to me how he sees it in 10 seconds. It has taken members of this study group years to see this, if they see it at all. And so that is a lovely bit of misdirection where the thing that defines Chang as a character is not his madness or his insanity. It's this deep sadness that if he could find a way to access it, could produce something beautiful. I really like that a lot.
Yeah, and I think it's funny to me, and I thought about this at the very end because using that and channeling that, he's a phenomenally good actor. We see, and at the end of it, like he is applauded by everybody. I mean, the way they shoot the audience is really great,
Hmm.
and the way they shoot the play scenes are very very good. But at the end, he goes out and he talks to the study group, who the whole time, the whole show, he's just wanted to be a member of. And then immediately his director's like, "Hey, we're going to a bar," and so he has to leave. He leaves and he says something along the lines of like, "I'm going to a bar now because that's what we like actors do." And you
Hmm.
could tell like he's found his group, but he's found his group just by like being incredibly like sad. I don't know. It's a very interesting sort of twist on his character, I think.
Yeah, I was curious what you thought about this because I think there's this maybe not common or conventional narrative about sadness, depression, and melancholia that we maybe fix it isn't the correct word, but we want to find ways to moderate one's experience with it, and I think within a capitalist society, we want and need to do this so so that you can become productive and be a useful worker, which then by extension makes you a useful consumer. But
Sure.
what I think I like about this is how this is not an episode that suggests that Chang needs to find some way to moderate his experience with his sadness. It's not even really asking him to be less sad. It's asking him to maybe reorient the way he thinks about his sadness. Instead of thinking of it as a problem, think of it as something that could create remarkable possibilities for you. And I was curious what you thought about this because I think we also need to be
Oh
careful here,
wow.
right?
Yeah.
Like because
Yeah.
I think especially when thinking about creative and artistic folk, there is this almost essentializing of sadness as a necessary component. This is something you see with Sylvia Plath, for example. But if you read any biographies of Sylvia Plath, what you actually learn is she was her most productive and most artistic when she was her least sad. Which is not to say she wasn't sad, but I think we often assume that, like, the thing that allowed a figure like Sylvia Plath to produce such beautiful poetry was, all the bad feelings and the bad vibes. So I don't know. Do you have any thoughts about this? Like how this episode wants us to think about sadness and how sadness can maybe be a meaningful part of our lives instead of being a thing that we just need to try to eradicate, you know?
Let's see. I think there is something to be said about this fascination and romanticizing of the tortured artist.
Right. Exactly. Good.
And
Yeah.
and I think when I was younger, and I'm sure this was for you too. When we first like discovered the literature that we liked, when we first got into fucking J.D. Salinger and that kind of shit, we were always like looking at these like tortured characters at something to strive to. I can remember like now like I have found notebooks of like stuff that I've written when I was younger. It is the most cringe inducing, vomit inducing, sad bullshit because I was at a moment in my life where I thought in order to make art, quote unquote, I have to be as sad as possible. And I think maybe this is like it's interesting. I would not have thought of this as like a commentary on that, but I totally think it is. I think Chang ultimately is a character who is very sad when you stop and look at him. If you take a step back, I think Frankie even said last episode like he's incredibly disturbed. Now we're at a moment where like we're almost capitalizing on that. We're like taking the insanity of this man and using it to not really like make him better, but to make art with him. I don't know. It's fascinating to think about. I've never
Yeah.
really stopped and really thought about that. But like when I do consider that like a director, and he even goes so far as to say it in this episode, like I see this sad, destroyed man. I think there are moments when a good person or a person with empathy would probably stop what they're doing and say, "Can I help you? Maybe I can help you get like into a therapy session. I could get you some help." But instead, I'm going to make you drill into that and use that to give me your performance. I don't know. I think that's kind of shitty now I'm thinking
It's
about it.
But I think this is what's tough about it because I'm incredibly skeptical of efficiency narratives. So, a book I really like is a book by, she's regrettably dead now, but it's a book by someone named Mari Rudy, and it's called Penis Envy. It's really a book about bad feelings. And as the title suggests, she's quite influenced by psychoanalysis. And so it's a book that incorporates that theory. But, John, it's a book about a lot of things, but it's a book about efficiency narratives, and she is equally skeptical of efficiency narratives. And her point is, we are often encouraged to not think of our sadness as something we should feel, because it makes us less efficient workers, which means we become inefficient consumers in a capitalist system. So again, but this is tricky because I agree with you. The last thing I want to do is to fetishize and celebrate these tortured artist narratives. I don't want to essentialize sadness as a good thing. But I also don't want to just think of sadness as a thing that we should try to fix anytime we feel it, because in doing so, it'll make us more efficient, more productive, and better consumers. I like to think about sadness. I really like sadness as just a feeling. I think it's a genuinely beautiful feeling. And I think I also reject the seemingly totalizing and universal association of negativity with sadness. But again, I also don't want to be overly utilitarian about it and say, well, let's just find ways to use our sadness productively. I think it's a difficult and tricky thing to navigate. But what I do like about this narrative is how it takes Chang's sadness seriously, and it doesn't just try to fix it. I think that's really lovely. And it's also, it's not like, I mean, this is a performance at Greendale Community College. This is
Yeah.
not about, like, I don't know, accumulating hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars or anything, right? So, like, there's really not even, let us say, a consumptive or a monetary benefit to do this. This just feels like one of those spaces where someone is permitted to feel a bad feeling without it being either A, something someone wants to or needs to correct, or B, something that someone monetizes. It's a space where you can just feel sad, and that's not a bad thing. And I think I
Yeah.
dig that. I don't know.
Yeah, I think I
Yeah, yeah.
no, I think that I know I mean I guess I agree with that. I think it's nice to let Chang win one, because I think this is the first time since like season 1 that he's been able to do it. So, yeah,
Yeah.
good for him.
Yeah. Yeah, no, good for him. And again, I like the episode's attitude, I think, towards sadness. While I think you're right, there's maybe some exploitative elements here as well. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. Oh, Annie Kim is back. It's nice to see her.
Annie Kim, shout out. She gets Ralph Macchio's role
She does.
at the end. Do you like the Karate Kid? Are you a fan of the Karate Kid?
Yeah, I think so. Oh, I wanted to talk about this. I do like this idea of like recasting films. And when I say recasting, I don't mean like finding different actors to play it, but recasting the narratives we have about films.
Oh, sure.
So,
Okay.
like this idea that, because I think, and you, I don't know, you can tell me how you felt about this. Did you, who did you think the Karate Kids movie was when you were a kid?
Well, as a child, because the film
Yeah.
is called The Karate Kid,
The Karate Kid, yeah.
I would assume it would be Daniel's movie. But now, yeah, I think I like that whoever, I mean, the guy that wrote the script is obviously very passionate about the
Yeah.
Karate Kid as a film. But yeah, I like the idea that it's actually not his movie, that it's Miyagi's movie. That's nice. It's pretty great.
Yeah. Yeah, no, this is the kind of thing that I ask my students to do a lot. Again, recasting a movie, because I think you could make an interesting and compelling argument that, for example, the Lord of the Rings trilogy, like maybe less make this argument, but more ask this question, like, what are the implications if we think of it as Sam's films? They're not.
They are.
They're not.
The story is Sam's story. Let's just get it.
Yeah, like that's
Let's just
pretty
get it
cool.
straight.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I mean, I think you would be inclined to think that maybe it's Frodo's or Aragorn's or whomever's, but I think when you do that intellectual work of recasting a movie, it maybe produces interesting thoughts and possibilities. And I was trying to think of others. Like, are there other movies that we should recast our understanding of to whom the narrative belongs?
Not off the top of my head, I can't. That's like something
Yeah.
you really gotta delve into. I don't know. I don't
Like,
think so.
okay, here's an interesting one. Maybe it just works for the first two. What if Back to the Future is Biff's movie, or they're Biff's movies?
A movie about a terrible rapist. Yeah.
Well,
I think that's pretty good. I think that's pretty good, Colin. I'd love to watch those movies. Hi, everybody. This weekend we're going to go watch a movie about a lovable, dumb rapist named Biff Tannen.
You're such an asshole.
Why don't you make like a
Okay.
tree and get out of here? Lordy day.
Well, never mind. You just ruined it. But no, I kid. I kid. What are some other shitty Biff jokes? Make like a tree and get out of here.
I don't know. That's like the big one.
Yeah, I was
We
thinking
should,
there were others.
before all's said and done, we really should do a Patreon on Back to the Future Part 2, right? Because it is the most underrated of the Back to the Future films. It gets a bad rep. What a great flick. Great flick.
Oh, I think it's spectacular. Yeah, it's. I mean, again, like predicted Trump, basically. Like
It
everyone
100%
like
predicted Trump,
so
yes.
fucking surprised. I'm like, kids, watch Back to the Future Part 2. They basically told you what would happen.
Correct.
Yeah.
It was all bad. Anyway, Colin, I have nothing else to say about this episode of Community. I highly recommend it. If you're listening to this and you don't watch the show, go watch this one. It really is like, it really hits all the points of why Community is a very sweet, wonderful show. That's what I'll say.
I agree. So, John, let us transition to some of our segments. John, who makes the Dean's List for you? Who is your best performance?
It's Chang. Not even close. He's phenomenal. He actually, like, no joke. I mean, I do, like, give credit to the filmmaking. When they shoot the play at the end, I legit did get very teary-eyed. I also was thinking about The Karate Kid, which is a very wonderful film. But yes, Chang does a phenomenal job. That's mine. What about you?
Yeah, I think it's Chang, right? He's really spectacular. He's funny. He's good. He's good. I mean,
He's good.
Ken Jeong is a bit meh for me at times. He's always trying. I'll say that about him, but he's very
That
good.
was so
in
goddamn
this.
rude, Colin. That's all I have to say. That's just rude how you said that. What if Ken Jeong listens to this show?
I don't mean to offend. He can leave a rating and review. We'll get to that. I'm happy to hear his feedback if he has thoughts about my performance. John, I need you to check the syllabus. And by doing so, I need you to identify your favorite bit of metatextual referencing and intertextual play. Go. That's a face, bub. Yeah.
It's all the Karate Kid stuff. Why wouldn't it be, right?
Yeah, I think so.
That's great.
I mean, just for variation, I'll say the adaptation of Jolene. I think a song that's really emerged as a kind of queer anthem, right?
Yeah, because Dolly is like, she's the greatest. She really is. She's the queen of Appalachia. She's like a gay icon. She rules. I love her dearly.
She does. She rules a lot. Yeah. John, do you have any best lines?
I didn't know. I was. Listen, I mean, we're gonna part the kimono so we can get a look inside what's going on here, Colin. I'm barely alive tonight. So the fact that I'm here recording. Anyway, why don't you give me your best lines?
Oh, I'm happy to. Tara, they did it. Those bastards. They finally did it. Elroy is very upset about the Tara. I'm not openly anything, and gay doesn't begin to cover it. That's a Dean line. Mean, you just did a baby bird murder monologue. That's an Abed line.
Yep.
I think, who says they want you to be a token homosexual? I think Jeff says it, and I think it's just the way he says it after the smash cut. I found it quite funny. Confine yourself to your role, Domingo. Okay, this is an Annie line. I was kind of born to act, Britta. When I do it, I can feel it pleasing the universe. That's dramatic. See? She's so bad. I mean, we haven't talked about Annie. She's really funny in this episode. Quite spectacular. And again, this is that thing we've discussed. You need to be a good actor to know how to successfully be a bad actor. That's what we see in this episode. Yeah. Oh, Manzuka shouting, Ralph Macchio showed up. Very funny. Very, very
so
funny.
Good. So good.
Just a hair back, Domingo. It's like you're breathing for me. That's a Dean line. So Britta says this, you skipped wings, and then for some inexplicable reason, Elroy shouts, insects have wings. And I don't know why he's so angry about this. Well, I'm a big fan of the performing arts, but I'll go to Chang's play. That's an Elroy line. Yeah.
So good.
Okay, this is the Manzukas opening to the play. Directors have a saying. Actors are worthless, empty-headed homunculi. But the right one in the right role can change the world. I think I like the empty-headed homunculi. Very funny. Someone said I lost a button, and then Elroy said, maybe we all lost a button. Very strange.
You just love Elroy. You love him.
I told you everything he says. Spectacular. John, that is our conversation for Season 6, Episode 4 of Community, Queer Studies and Advanced Waxing. John,
oh my God,
we have a Patreon page.
We do. I can't believe I made it through the end of the episode. Colin, we have a Patreon page for $3 a month. You become, we love you, a patron. You get all the exclusive content.
He's getting there.
I'm getting there. Above that, $7 a month, become producer of the show. You get the exclusive content and a sticker. Above that, you become we love you. You get the exclusive content, a sticker and a shirt. Above that, I don't know, man. I guess we could shoot some Wild Turkey 101 together, which is a phenomenally cheap, wonderful bourbon. Thank you, Perry Ritter, friend of the pod. We appreciate you for turning us on to that. Colin, it's the first link in the show notes. We have some producers to thank. Please go right ahead and do that.
Yes, thank you to the following producers of the Hop-Ons podcast. Thank you to Katana, Crindy, Rachel, Kate, Daniel, Lars, Rob, Robin, Jeff, and Andrew. And John's right, it's the first link in the show notes. The second link is to our Threadless page if you want to buy Hop-Ons podcast merchandise. And John, if someone were so inclined as to rate and review the podcast, what would you say? What would I say?
Well, it would be fantastic, and we would read your review here on the air. And Colin,
for example,
you let me know we have a new review to read.
Mm-hmm.
This is on the podcasts app from Apple Podcasts. Colin, this is 5 stars. This is from Jeffrey Malone. Jeffrey, thank you for leaving this review. Get Greendale while it's gooby. 5 stars. There are multiple times during each episode when I vehemently... Is that how you say that?
I think that's fine. Or vehement. No, I'm...
Vehemently disagree with Colin and or John. If that's not the mark of a great podcast about community, I don't know what is. Jeffrey, thank you for that. I don't know if you're being facetious, but we'll take the 5 stars. We do appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah.
And also for putting a word in there that I could not, for the life of me, fucking pronounce. Jeffrey, I want to let you know that I do live in the fucking southern Highland Appalachians of Virginia. It's hard for me to really even read sentences, so I don't know why you put a fucking word that difficult in your reviews. I'm just kidding. Thank you for the review. We do appreciate it.
He's lost it. John, spectacular work. I need you to go and lie down. So for the Hop-Ons podcast, my name is Colin Cox.
My name is John Phelps. Okay, bye.